Hello, it's Tonya Duncan Ellis, author of the Sophie Washington series, with another episode of Write This, My Author Interview Show. And today we have another special guest, Mary Boone, who is a nonfiction children's author who's written over 60 books. And I can't wait to learn about her author story, author journey, and tips that she'll share us on critique groups. And this is very important for all authors to be involved in a critique group. I've been in several groups, but at the end of last year, I joined one that I love, and they've helped me take my writing to another level, and I'm so grateful for working with them and being able to share with them. So I see that Mary has joined us, and I'm going to get her on, and I see some other special guests. Lizbeth Books, I'm glad to see you here. I've missed seeing you out in the author community, and see some others on here, the author of Madison, Miles, and Friends. I love that series. See you all here. Thanks for joining in. So let me get Mary in here, and we'll learn about critique groups. So we invited her on, and hope that things are going well where you are. Hey, Mary, how are you?
I am great. How are you doing?
Fine. I'm so glad to have you on. And I read a little bit about you, and I was laughing because it said that you had ridden an elephant and you've jumped out of planes. And when I was a little girl, I rode an elephant at the zoo, and my parents were making fun of me for riding an elephant. So I'm going to tell them that I interviewed somebody else that also rode an elephant.
I did. And when kids ask me about it, I always say it sounds great until the elephant sneezes. And there is a lot of elephant snot that can come out of an elephant sneeze. So it was one of the bumpier rides I had.
Mine had a lot of flies around it. So that's the only thing I remember when I rode an elephant. But I'm really excited to have you on because I've not had an author come on and talk about critique groups. And I was really happy when you mentioned that because that's so important for authors.
It is. I think writing is such a solitary activity, and we can get in our own heads and start thinking what we're writing is absolute garbage or it's the best thing ever. And without somebody to take a look at it and give us a little feedback, it's really hard to know where you are. So I think critique groups are essential, no matter what stage of the process you're at.
Right. And before we delve into that a little deeper, can you tell us a little bit about your background, your author journey, and your books?
Sure. I spent the first part of my career as a journalist. I was a newspaper reporter, and then I went into freelancing and public relations. And it was actually a college friend who he called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, would you write a book about Lindsay Lohan? I'm working for a publisher and we need somebody to quick write a book about Lindsay Lohan." And if you ever see those books like at Scholastic book fairs about teen pop stars, here's what you should know is they have to be written really quickly because you just never know when something bad is going to happen with one of those teen pop stars or sports stars. So it was a really quick turnaround, just a couple months to write this 130 something page book. And I did it, and I sort of got hooked, and I just kept writing and writing, and did a lot of writing for the educational market. And then my book Bugs for Breakfast, How Eating Insects Could Help Save the Planet, came out in October. And I have my first picture book is coming out next spring. Can't talk about it yet, but I'm super excited about that one.
Yeah, that's congratulations. That's the thing I don't like about the publishing industry. Everything is so secretive and you can't announce anything when you get good news.
You get great news. I've had this great news for over a year. Over a year. That's how slow publishing works. So when I see people say, "Oh, I've waited 2 months," I'm like, "Oh, sister, you have not even begun the wait." So
Right. Now you said that you mentioned you wrote books about pop stars, and did you write one about Justin Bieber?
This is something else I learned about publishing especially working with some of these big companies that are selling to teenagers. I'm looking at my bookshelf. I think there are 3 or 4 Justin Bieber books. And a lot of the content is the same. They would be updated with like who's his new love interest. This is when he was, still a teenager, still had a swag coach. This is a long time ago, but yeah, I got to sit in the front row of a Justin Bieber concert. That's what research looks like when you're writing teen biographies. I had never experienced something so loud in my entire life. So
you're a true believer. You're true.
I am. I'm a believer. I do enjoy Justin. Now, I've written about some stars that I'm like, I don't know. But no, I liked his music.
Yeah, he can sing. I like some of his songs. I think he can sing. Yeah. But so now let's get back to critique groups. We talked about your career. So basically, journalism kind of was a segue for you into the children's literature space.
It really was. And I think if you can write, about city council meetings or school board meetings on a deadline, or I was writing a lot of concert reviews on a deadline, you can write books. It's all the same basic things. So,
and I used to be a journalist, and I also wrote feature stories and things too. Yeah, so I see how that leads you right on into it.
And we get deadlines. I see some people who are like, oh, my deadline came and went. And I'm like, no, deadlines cannot come and go. You live by the deadline. I mean, with newspapers, they would just print the paper with I don't think they'd print a white spot, but they'd throw in a wire story that really didn't matter if you didn't make the deadline. So
right. Now with critique groups, so what exactly are critique groups, and how can we start one? How do we run them? Really, we need to know everything about them.
Everything. Well, a critique group is basically a group of writers, and some of the groups that I'm work with are actually we have writers and illustrators involved in the same groups, and we get together and share our work and get feedback. And it's not about having somebody else fix your work, and it's not about somebody giving you just a lot of compliments to build up your ego. You're looking for really great feedback. And that takes time to find the right mix of people who can do that. So I thought I would tell you a little bit about how some of the critique groups I've been involved in and some of the experiences that I've had that have been really helpful and not so helpful. Here in the Northwest, I'm in Tacoma, Washington. And so I'm in the Western Washington chapter of SCBWI. And we, driving from Tacoma to Seattle, it's not very far, but it can take several hours. It's traffic. And people don't want to do that. So we, a couple of years ago, decided as a region that we now have networks. So in our network, which is more Tacoma centric and a little easier for people who live here to get to, we started some critique groups. And what we do is we have at least once a month a critique group that everybody is invited to. It doesn't matter what stage you're at, doesn't matter if you write YA or picture books or middle grade or fantasy or whatever you're writing, you're invited. And it's sort of like Critique Group 101. It's where we sort of teach people what a critique group looks like. And then the goal is that when you're at that big critique group, you find other people who are writing the same sort of stuff you are, or who get your stuff, or who you click with, and you form smaller critique groups. So our critique group has birthed we have spawned many critique groups. Some are just, 3 or 4 people who are all interested in middle grade fiction, or some are, interested in YA fantasy. And so, that's my goal, is that people, and they're always welcome to come back to the big critique group.
But what happens, so for those who don't know anything about critique groups, what happens in the critique group? What do you do?
So the way we run it is everybody we usually have to limit how much you can bring because it's often a large group. So we'll say, bring 5 pages double spaced of your story, bring copies so everyone can have it. Ideally, people would read them ahead of time online, but people are busy. So we've resorted to, you need to bring copies because not everybody's going to read it ahead of time. And then we're all sitting there. And when it's your turn to be critiqued, Tonya, it's your turn to be critiqued. I'm going to read your story. Okay. And I really think that's a critical part of it, is that somebody else reads your story. I have a couple members who it's a terrifying feeling that first time to have someone else read your words out loud. But it's so important because you're so familiar with your story. You know where to pause. You know everything about that text. So to hear someone else trip over bumpy sentences or to hear a word repeated over and over, that listening is so important because it gives you a chance to go, oh, I've not heard, and it's not the same as having your computer read it back to you in that automated AI voice. So having a real reader read it, and then after it's been read, we take whatever allotted time we have to go around and offer comments. And everybody tries to stand. This is what I love about this story, but here's where I got caught up. This is what tripped me up. This is the character feels a little inconsistent. So not so much fixing the problems for the writer, but pointing at what the problems might be. And I used to teach creative writing, and I've had students who just have, they take critiques so personally, but what's so important to remember is that it's the work that's being critiqued, it's not you. This is about your story, and everybody in the room, I feel like people don't come back to my critique sessions if they don't have this attitude that we all want to make everybody else's stories the best they can be. So that's what we do. And we just take turns going around talking about, if somebody comes to critique and says, I really want you guys to focus on dialogue, or I really want you to focus on this kiss scene. I've never written a kiss and it just feels off to me. If they have very specific things, that is super helpful. Other things, I know that there are some people who really, really like to have a genre-specific critique group. So only picture book writers or only fantasy writers. And that's great. But I'm going to tell you, I think I get some of the best feedback from people who don't write in my genre. So, and I feel like the comments I give, sometimes my fantasy friends laugh at me, but I'm like, okay, I didn't know fairies could do that. Or can you really say the word hell in a world where hell doesn't exist? And so we're giving feedback. Let's say you're writing middle grade fantasy or YA fantasy. It could be the very first fantasy book that reader has ever picked up. And so I'm reading it like a brand new fantasy reader. Or mystery reader, or whatever the genre. And I just had the experience of this picture book I'm writing needed some back matter, and so I reached out to a couple of critique partners. We didn't have a meeting, but I just reached out to them and said, I need somebody else to look at this back matter I'm creating. And neither of them write nonfiction, neither of them write picture books, but they're great writers and I trust their opinions. So I said, here's what back matter does, and I need to know that this makes sense, and I need to know that I haven't had some horrible grammar, punctuation mistakes or whatever before I send it off to an editor, because I don't want to look silly. So you have to really trust your critique partners, and then take the feedback that they give you and decide what of it you're going to file away and what of it you're just going to go, they just don't get it. I always give the advice that if several people are saying the same thing, then maybe there's a problem with the manuscript and you need to re-examine it.
Now, how many people do you normally have in a group? How many?
Well, it depends. You can have huge groups, and then in order to have a great critique, you would all gather, let's say at the library or whatever, and then say, now we're going to divide up and we're going to take the 4 fantasy writers here, the 4 mystery writers here, the 4 nonfiction writers here. And that works. I think a really great, effective critique group is somewhere between 4 and 6 writers. If you're going to really delve deep. And how often do you critique? You've got to find the people who want to do what you do. I'm in several different, because I'm running some critique groups. I really only go to one for myself, but I'm running several others. I'm not sure I could commit to more than once a month. But I will tell you, I have a critique coming up next week, and I don't have a new chapter ready for them. And so that's sort of, that deadline feeling, Tonya, that we've experienced. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's going to get my butt in gear so that I can have something new for them to look at.
And I'm seeing too, in my group, it inspires people because one had an agent, And then so one of the other ones like, I need an agent. You all have agents. And that's getting her going.
We sort of build extra time into each of our critiques where it's not just the critique, but it's people are able to ask questions about getting an agent or publishing, or I've written my book. Now, what do I do next?
Right.
So I try not to let that distract from the actual critiquing. In fact, I saw somebody ask a question about Zoom. And what I do with Zoom now, when we've had Zoom in the Northwest, we've been shut down for a very, very long time. But what we've found is that we're probably still going to continue at least some form of Zoom critiques because some people just don't want to go out. They don't want to leave their home at night. They're tired. They can be in their pajamas and still participate. So what I do is I say the session starts at 6:30 p.m. If you want to get on and chat and catch up or ask questions, I'll have the Zoom open at 6:10. And so we can spend that first 20 minutes before the critique just talking business or talking about our kids or how was your vacation. But it really lets us get down to work. And then beyond the Zoom question, I have been in some critique groups where people just are exchanging manuscripts online and they never meet face to face. I think that was harder for me, and it truly did not keep my interest. Zoom, at least there's interaction, and we've had people join our group since Zoom, so it's not like we were all people who knew each other before. But I think that at least being able to see someone's face and hearing somebody read that story is so critical.
Right.
So.
Because we did mine is virtual, and I joined virtual, but it's been, yeah, but we see each other, right.
Yeah. We are just talking about going back to a face-to-face sometime once a month, sometime probably in the next 2 months. But, cafes are just reopening here for that sort of thing. So it'll be a little bit before we do that. But I'll tell you, there are people who need to see other people. I know I have one writing friend who, she is so talented, but she's got 3 little kids. It's just like, I just need to get out and see other adults who understand this world. And Zoom's not doing it for her. So.
Now, what results have you seen by participating in the critique groups?
Wow. Well, personally, I never had an agent before this critique group that I'm in now. One of our critique group members is an agent, and I think this is the smartest thing she could have done, is she said, she wants to write as well. She's writing, and she will answer all sorts of agenting questions, but she's like, I can't be an agent for any of you, for any of my writing friends.
Oh.
This is a friend thing. This is not an agent thing. And I totally respect that. But boy, she was sort of the one who kicked me in the butt and said, you need an agent. And because she's been in the business, because other writers in the group had been in the business much longer, I really feel like they've been able to offer advice about, these are agents who might be interested in the kind of work that you do. This is what you could do to your manuscript to make it a little more marketable. So I've gotten a lot of great advice, but I also feel it's like, are you familiar with Little Free Libraries?
Yes.
The philosophy of take a book, leave a book.
Right.
I think that's the same thing with critique groups. You've got to take the advice, take the wisdom, but you got to leave some too. So even if you're a newbie, you can do that by just offering great comments. Or, I'm a reader, I'm not an experienced author, but I'm telling you as a reader, this reminds me of this other book that I just read. And that might be helpful to someone who's looking for comps. So everybody has something they can contribute. And the connections. That's the other thing about critique groups, is your critique group, I feel like I'm just talking on and on, but your critique group should be your biggest cheerleaders. They really should be. And so when somebody gets great publishing news, your critique friends should help amplify that message. They should celebrate with you. And just, instead of being jealous, which my husband's in marketing, he's like, I don't get why you're all so supportive of each other. So I think that critique friends are the people who cheer for you, celebrate,
And they
Yeah,
understand what you're going through. So that's how they're
better
happy.
than anybody,
Yeah.
don't they? Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to say, she mentioned comp titles. And if you're not familiar with that, those are comparable books to what, similar to what you're writing. So when you're querying an agent, you'll list 3 to 4 comp titles of books that are similar to the book that you wrote.
Yeah. Or sometimes people will say, oh, it's the Addams Family meets Murder, She Wrote, and which will catch an agent's, attention. So not every agent needs comp titles, but a lot of them really, really want them. And it's different than a mentor text. And a lot of people get those confused. A mentor text is more like, I really want to write a nonfiction or an informational fiction book that's got a little bit of humor to it, but I've not done that before. I'm going to go look at some really great, funny, informational fiction books so I can see what other people have done and get some ideas. Those are mentor texts. Comp titles are more, my book is in the vein of this.
Right, right.
So,
So, yeah. Now, if someone wants to join a critique group, you mentioned SCBWI. So how can they do that through SCBWI?
well, yeah. So SCBWI, at least in our region, and I think almost every region has this. If you just reach out to your administrators for SCBWI, they're going to be able to put you in touch with critique process or coordinators or someone in your region. That's one awesome way is through SCBWI. But I'm imagining here in the Northwest, we have the Pacific Northwest Writers Association. They are doing critiques both in person and online, so you can do that. You can also go to your library. They very often know about writers groups or independent bookstores. Maybe some of the big, Barnes and Nobles also know, but I know that if you walk into an indie bookstore in my neighborhood, they could all tell you about writers groups that are meeting that might be open to new members. And just because they're open to new members doesn't mean it's the right critique group for you. You've got to try it out. You've got to see, it's sort of like book clubs. Are they just getting together to drink wine? Are they really talking about writing?
Right.
So you want to find people who make you better, who you gel with at least a little, okay? And remember, people don't have to love everything you write, but it would be nice if they didn't hate everything you wrote. So give it a little bit of time. And then if it doesn't work out, you can leave. It's like dating. It's not a long-term marriage. You can leave because life's too short to be in a bad critique group. So find one that makes you better and go for it.
Yeah, so this is great. And someone had put in the comments they feel lost with some of the terminology, but getting in a critique group can help you as well because you'll meet people who are at different stages in their journey and you can learn from them or ask them questions in the group too.
Oh my gosh, I've been at this for so long, and there are still terms that I hear that every once in a while I'm like, what does that mean? Or there's somebody has a new term. An agent just said, or an editor just told my agent she's only buying youngifications. And I was like, okay, I don't want to sound stupid, but what's a youngification?
Yeah.
And a youngification, for those interested, is taking an adult title and making a kid's version. So like the Malala book has a kid version. The Michelle Obama book has a kid version. So that was the only nonfiction they were buying. But I had never heard that term, and new terms like that come up all the time. And you can't feel silly for asking. And once you get this critique group of buddies, you'll be able to ask those questions and not feel silly. But my very first stop would always be SCBWI. And if you're not getting answers regionally, reach out to the national and ask them, who in my region should I be talking to? Because maybe it's going to an email address that isn't being used anymore. Just don't take no answer as a no, okay?
And then fears about critique, what I found in the groups I've been in, usually they say what they like about it. They try to be positive. And in our group, we ask each other, what do you want us to comment on? Like, what things were you wondering about? So I'm not saying, I don't like this, I don't like, I'm only commenting on what they asked me to comment on. And we try to be positive and affirming for everyone.
Yes,
Yeah.
I totally agree. And there are times that, there may be something that somebody didn't ask about, but I think this comes from having edited for many years. I'm like, but wait, in the first page, Josh was 16 and now he's 14. And those sorts of little, how old is Josh? Because I don't know. Um, we talk a lot about critiquing, if you're only taking 5 pages or you're only taking a chapter, that works great for picture books. But if you're talking about older kids projects, so a middle grade or a YA, and you're just plopping it, out of the middle of the book, I also think it's really, really helpful to put a couple sentences at the top of your chapter that says, just here's a reminder of where we are in the book.
Mm-hmm.
King Spence is trying to win back the heart of Lady Dewey, and this is the problem they've encountered.
Right.
But at the same time, we also have this rule in my critique group that somebody will say, well, this is chapter 16. And we have to remind them that it is chapter 16, but I should be able to figure things out, because a lot of times a reader will put a book down and not look at it again for 2 weeks. And they need to be able to pick it up and go, oh yeah, I remember. Thanks for the little reminders, the little clues along the way. So I think just a little context. Also, sometimes it helps if people put what the genre is or what the age is on the sheets, just so when people are reading it, what they're aimed for. And we talk about everything, not just the books, but one of the best pieces of advice I got from critique was, hey, your story is great, but your title is just really ordinary. And got pushed to really think about, this was for my agent friend who said, I'm getting, hundreds of emails. You've got to have a title on that manuscript that makes me want to open it. And that's made me think a lot. Now, when we have critique groups, we talk a lot about titles and subtitles and what's intriguing to readers.
So that's fortunate for you that you have an agent in your active group.
Yeah, it really, I mean, she's a godsend to all of us. And those of us who have known her for a long time, I don't hesitate to call her and say, okay, I know you're not my agent, but I have to ask you a question. And she'll answer. She's just, I would do the same for her. So.
Okay, well, that's great. So anyone interested in joining a critique group, if you're a member of the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators, that's great. And I met Mary through a group I'm in called the 12 by 12 Picture Book Challenge. Unfortunately, I think it's closed now for people. I think it closed in February.
It is, yeah.
But it starts again in January, and it has been phenomenal because you can post your manuscript, your picture book, and you get all kinds of critiques and comments. And I have really enjoyed being a part of this group.
Yeah, I'm also a judge for a program called Rate Your Story, which it's a paid program, but I also think that it's if you're not up to the stage where you feel like, I saw somebody comment that like it's too much anxiety to have somebody read your manuscript out loud. Okay, baby steps. Send it off, and to a service like Rate Your Story or somebody who just offers critiques, and they will critique your story and give you some great feedback. So then that's a first step. Then, okay, I've gotten that feedback. That person told me it's okay. It could use some work. Now I'm ready to take the step and go to an in-person group or a Zoom group where I'm going to see real life human beings. So.
Right. Well, this has been wonderful, Mary. Thank you for all the insights and the information you've shared. And where can people find you and find your books?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. Look, it's Bugs for Breakfast. Bugs for Breakfast, you can get it on Amazon or any independent bookstore, Barnes & Noble. My website is www.boone, Boone, writes, like with a pencil.com. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram, all as Boone Writes. So I would love to correspond. If anybody has any questions, reach out to me on Twitter or social media or drop me a note through my website. I would love to answer your questions. I really appreciate I have really enjoyed this. Tonya, I am not a technology person. I am not, I'm not into this sort of thing at all, but you make this so very easy. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm so happy that you answered my request for people to interview, because this has been something that I've been interested in, because I really just started getting involved heavily in critique groups. So I was so happy you suggested that as a topic.
I
But
think it's really important. So,
mhm.
again, if anybody has questions, reach out. And Tonya, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you all for tuning in. And we'll see you next week for another episode of Write This. Bye bye.